I abandoned my form of traditional, if you will, pro-Palestine activism, just due to the fact that I felt a lot of it was very ideologically driven. I am very pro-Palestine. I care about my people. I care about the Palestinian people's just and urgent aspirations. But I also am radically pragmatic. I'm against Hamas, against violence, against these maximalist views and sloganeering.
The person you just saw and heard speaking, Ahmed Fouad Alkhatib, is from the Gaza Strip. He's been living in America for many years, and October 7th changed his life, as it did for so many of us. He is what he calls a pragmatic realist, and he is determined to make a positive difference. In part one of this podcast, Ahmed shares his evolution from a very hardcore anti-Israel activist to what he has become today. In part two, which we will drop tomorrow, we get into the nitty-gritty of October 7th and the aftermath. Thanks so much for being here. Let's do it. Saturday, May 17th. It's about 9:20 p.m. where I am in Israel. Ahmed Fouad Alkhatib, 2:20-ish in Washington, D.C., where you are.
Indeed.
Thanks for joining State of Tel Aviv today. Really appreciate you making time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Delighted to reconnect. Excited to have this discussion with you.
The problem with us is that we could go on forever. So unfortunately, we're going to have to do a time-limited version today. And there's a heck of a lot to talk about. It's been quite a time. Ahmed, I want to start just with some really brief background information, context, so people listening understand who you are and where you come from. You were born in the Gaza Strip, correct?
So let's talk about complex right off the gate. I was actually born in Saudi Arabia, but I am a Gaza native. I grew up in Gaza until the age of 15. I came to the United States as a teenage high school exchange student. Lived here for a year with a host family and was supposed to go back to Gaza. I left 1 month before the withdrawal of Israeli settlements, or what's known as the disengagement. Um, I was in Gaza in the 90s on and off, but it's a very common story for a lot of Gazans to go and work in the Gulf nations. They build a nest for themselves. They use that to build a house in Gaza, and then they move back permanently. And so my family did that, and we again would go back and forth. And we lived in Gaza in the mid 90s, and then we moved permanently to Gaza, and I experienced the Oslo process, especially the tail end of it. I went from having an Egyptian travel document to a Palestinian passport. Gaza had a short-lived airport that I flew into in '99 and in 2000. We were on the Palestinian Airlines. Can you imagine just even uttering those words today? Palestinian Airlines and Gaza International Airport. I have two brothers and two sisters. My dad passed away 5 years ago, but he was actually a UNRWA doctor, the UNRWA being the not so controversial UN agency in the Gaza Strip. My mom, as a retired math teacher, my dad worked in northern Gaza. He ran the Jabalia clinic for the UN agency. And my family remained in the Gaza Strip after I came to the United States. And so I had a foot in both worlds, if you will. And I experienced both the optimism of the Oslo peace process, as well as the sad realities of violence associated with the Second Intifada, both in terms of as it related to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but also the internal Palestinian violence, if you will, as far as Hamas's rise to power, the gradual undermining of the Palestinian Authority. Gaza is a very complicated place in terms of its social fabric and makeup, and that's a whole other separate conversation.
Where in the Gaza Strip, Ahmed, is your family's home?
Our family's home is in Gaza City in the north. But the second home and this is on my mom's side of the family, is in Rafah in southern Gaza. And I say that was my second home because we were there all the time, and especially on weekends. And both of them have unfortunately been destroyed in this war. But so I try to go back to Gaza, believe it or not, in 2006 after the end of the high school cultural exchange program. Upon attempting to do so in June of 2006, I was in Egypt about to cross in through the Rafah border crossing. Hamas abducted Gilad Shalit in Gaza. That happened, with resulting in a mini war that closed the borders, followed by the 33-day war between Hezbollah and Israel in Lebanon. And so after 3 months of being stuck in Egypt with no real options to go back into Gaza, thanks to the support of human rights and peace activists in the United States, I was able to return here, pursue the last year of my high school education, and begin the process of applying for political asylum status. And the very day of my asylum interview was June 14th, 2007, which is the very day that Hamas violently took over the Gaza Strip, beginning the series of tragedies that ultimately got us to where we're at here. I became a citizen of the United States in 2014. So that was approximately a little over 11 years ago. And throughout my time here in the United States, I have kind of had a foot in not just the life in the United States and doing pursuing academic and professional goals, and also life in Gaza through my family, through my community, through some of the projects that I was leading in Gaza. But domestically here, I both was involved with what you would call your traditional pro-Palestine form of activism. That was, college campus forms of activism, a lot of the protest movements, Jewish Voice for Peace, Students for Justice in Palestine, that type of activism. But I was also simultaneously always involved in a lot of dialogue and communication and exchanges and conversations with mainstream Jewish audiences, folks who are not just the leftists, folks who are not just Zionists, folks who are the mainstream within the Israeli society as well as the Jewish community. And so it was a very interesting parallel experience. And I should say that I abandoned my form of traditional, if you will, pro-Palestine activism, just due to the fact that I felt a lot of it was very ideologically driven. I am very pro-Palestine. I care about my people. I care about the Palestinian people's just and urgent aspirations. But I also am radically pragmatic. I'm against Hamas, against violence, against these maximalist views and sloganeering, which I've consistently felt actually undermines the Palestinian people. And I've long believed that we need allyship and partnership with diverse Jewish and Israeli and, yes, Zionist audiences. And that was a very controversial opinion within some of these activist circles.
I'm going to call you then a radical pragmatist because that's what you called. And I like it. It's great. I might have used the term moderate, but um, this kind of evolution of yours from being in the more ideologically driven kind of activist camp to becoming someone who will speak with me and so many other people. How long was that transition? Because it certainly wasn't overnight, I'd expect.
I would say it was the totality of multiple threads coming together. Go back to like even 2008, 2009, the first major war between Israel and Hamas. I would be asked questions by reporters, and I'll be like, of course, I condemn the rockets and I condemn Hamas's, launching of random attacks against Israeli civilians. And I remember vividly, I was 18 at the time, and I was from Gaza. And so people were like, yes, let's put him in front of cameras. This is great because there aren't that many Gazans here. I was being groomed to be a face for some folks in the pro-Palestine activist movement. And they were like, no, 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 Ahmed, come on, what are you doing? You don't talk about the rockets. You don't condemn Hamas. You pivot away from the question. You immediately bring it back to Israel and the occupation and the blockade and the Israeli actions. And I said, okay, but I genuinely believe that rockets are bad. I genuinely, because Hamas shoots rockets and then the Israelis come and retaliate and destroy a whole block. And like people in Gaza don't want Hamas to launch rockets like from their vicinity of their homes. Like, what are you talking about? Like, this is actually like what, like so many people in Gaza despise these rockets. Like, they're like, no, 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 it doesn't matter. Like, it was this very dogmatic talking point style activism um, that didn't really leave space for nuance. And I'm not even doubting the sincerity of some of these activists. That was like the first kind of like early on. I was like, wait a minute, I'm from Gaza. I'm talking at the time I had only been in the United States for like 3 years. I'm talking to family. I'm talking to my friends all the time. And everybody is like, we despise Hamas. We despise them taking over. We despise all what they're doing. So I immediately was like, this movement, this activism is disconnected from what Gazans are actually thinking and saying. But nevertheless, it was the only option. It was the only game in town. So I stuck with it. And I thought, okay, maybe over time, something could change, something could give. This is a new phenomenon with Hamas taking control. So I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. But as time went on, and the idea of more boycotts and anti-normalization and don't engage the Zionists, and it got to a place where I sometimes like had to outright hide the fact that I am talking to Zionists. I wanted to know what Zionists are thinking. I wanted to know, what is this Zionism thing? Like, in the Gaza Strip as children, like we got a certain understanding of Zionism that was very, and I'm not saying I wanted to become a Zionist, far from it. I'm simply saying I wanted to hear, what are Israelis thinking? What are like the mainstream of the center and the center right, not the Haaretz crowd, not the Jewish Voice for Peace crowd. And even that was criminalized. So that was another piece. And then there was finally, I think the final straw for me was the 2014 war, because that was where I felt the first real I mean Hamas, like, was the way that Hamas was conducting the war, the way that Hamas dragged the war on, refused to engage in a ceasefire early on, the way that Hamas foolishly thought they could actually force Israel to get an airport and a seaport, which is something that I would later work on, and people cheering on in a very minute sense for Hamas. I was like, this is not a movement that I could really get behind. And so it was over time, but there were a few, I would say, kind of like hard stops where I felt that this movement would not explicitly separate the Palestinian people from Hamas, or elements of it. But even then, and I know we'll talk about October 7th, but even then, it was nowhere near where we're at right now.
What you're talking about is so important because, of course, you know, everybody's an expert now. And many people will come in and they look and they say, well, I mean, Hamas was elected, right? Which is true. There was an election and Hamas was elected. Um, and I don't think, though, and you, of course, as someone from Gaza, can speak to this much more authoritatively than I can. One of so many things that I think is really difficult is, where is the dissent? Why is there no dissent? You've explained your personal journey and said, well, maybe like they'll kind of mellow out, they'll be getting power, which often happens. Power moderates, right? And power did not have that impact on Hamas. Why do you think the people have not dissented? Is it because they support Hamas? Or are there more nefarious reasons that prevent large numbers of people in Gaza from protesting, revolting, dissenting?
To be clear for listeners, we're talking about elections that took place in 2006, when
Mhm.
Gaza's population was 1.4 million. The elections took place in both Gaza and the West Bank. They were not just in Gaza. And Hamas in the Gaza districts of the totality of the Palestinian territories, the majority of their victory came from West Bank districts, not from Gaza. Because after the withdrawal of Israeli settlements, a lot of Palestinians in Gaza were genuinely ready for a different pathway forward to leverage the opening of the strip to engage in more of a nation building project. That said, the framing of Hamas at the time was such that this was a vote against the PA much more than it was a vote for Hamas's ideology. This was a vote for an alternative to the corrupt authority that squandered billions of dollars since the Oslo peace process. And unfortunately, Fatah did end up, one party rule corrupts. And when they came in 93, after Oslo, I mean, they got to a point where they were like a total mafia like governance style. And so all Hamas had to do is say, we're not that. We're not these people. And our religious piety will prevent us from being corrupt because Allah's watching over us. And then furthermore, Hamas, when they participated in these elections, like there was very much so the kind of understanding that you would be agreeing to the quartet and international conditions, which said you have to renounce violence and you have to acknowledge Israel, recognize Israel, a framework that was supported by the U.S., UN, European Union, the Arab states. Everybody was behind the quartet as spearheading, the kind of like the solution, if you will, for what they believed was the issue of the impasse of the Israel and Palestine issue. So that context is very important. Most people do not understand that context. So immediately, as soon as that election happened, I mean, there were people that, of course, were opposed to Hamas. As time went on, as time progressed, and Hamas became the corrupt authority that it was, that some people opposed Hamas based on ideology. Palestinians historically had been secular, and Hamas Islamized the society. When the Second Intifada began, I remember vividly Hamas,
Mhm.
one of the first things they did, they didn't organize a march to go and throw stones at the Israelis. They organized a march and they went and burned the sole alcohol bar in Gaza. Remember that Hamas's first victims in the 1980s were Palestinian women who had acid thrown at their faces for not dressing modestly, and Palestinian men who were suspected of being collaborators. Yahya Sinwar was not in Israeli prison for killing Israelis. He was in Israeli prison for killing Palestinians.
With quite singular brutality.
Precisely, precisely. And so there was opposition that was brewing to Hamas. But once they took over and they practically implemented the very single party rule that they once accused Fatah of, I mean, it only took them like a year to implement the single party rule, then it became incredibly complicated to mount any form of legitimate opposition to them. They immediately went after the clans who had their own arsenals and weapons and their own kind of like local social fabric, if you will. They very quickly, just like the Taliban, just like Al Qaeda, just like ISIS, one of these Islamist groups, and this has been shown in a lot of studies. One of the things that the Islamists always do is they immediately establish law and order by implementing a monopoly on the use of violence and force. They're the only force in town. So crime went down, but so did any space for opposition. So you tell me, if you're in North Korea, if you're in Eritrea, if you're in Belarus, if you're in Putin's Russia, if you're in in the Islamic Republic of Iran, even though people did courageously protest against the regime, just like they did in Gaza in 2015, 2017, 2019, 2023, and Hamas represses them. They kill them. They torture them to death. Some of them, my friends. The IDF showed footage and videos that were captured in Gaza of how Hamas was torturing people, hanging them from the ceiling and killing them. You tell me, how is it that an unarmed population going to stand up to a group that has built, 500 kilometers of tunnels underground? That the IDF itself has now, sadly, for the sake of my people, the people of Gaza, for a year and a half hasn't been able to subdue entirely. So I think there's an unrealistic expectation that somehow the people of Gaza's inability to mount a successful opposition to Hamas is equivalent to support. Now, I want to be clear about something. There are levels there are tiers of support for Hamas. There's ideological support by a small number of Islamist hardcore beneficiaries of the group. There are yes men and women who just need the jobs. It's kind of like the Ba'ath regime in Iraq. If you want a job, if you want anything done, you need to be a part of Hamas or on the periphery of Hamas. And then there's just people who are struggling to provide for their families day to day. And so that is like hungry people are not able to mount a revolution. But multiple things can be true once again. Like I said, there's streams of support for Hamas. There are multiple streams of opposition that were visual and public. And then there's just the overwhelming number of the population that were not able to stand up to the Islamist terror regime.
So, how then do you explain the relative quiet of the Palestinian diaspora? It's a large diaspora, it's a very well educated diaspora, and sophisticated when it comes to communications. By the way, when you mentioned that one of the first things Hamas did was kind of monopolize force, right? The use of force in the Gaza Strip. Correct me if I'm wrong, they also monopolized the mass media, access to media,
Yes.
and which is also very important for people to understand.
And they forced NGOs and everybody to register, like
Right.
everybody from the UN to any humanitarian organization, you had to register and you had to work under the purview of Hamas. That's why UNRWA was ultimately corrupted.
Right. How do you explain, though, Ahmed, the lack of well, there hasn't been a very strong voice from the Palestinian diaspora, and if anything, their voice has kind of lapsed into the default ideological criticism of Zionism, of Israel, of the occupation, of the Nakba. They seem to, the institutions that represent the Palestinian diaspora, I know in Canada, you can speak to it, I'm sure, in America, but they're all over the world. They've defaulted to this very rigid, sclerotic, ideological position. Do you agree?
Yes, unfortunately. So multiple things happened. I think what being pro-Palestine to so many, I think, has evolved, or you can say devolved, to simply mean being anti-Israel. And one of my raison d'etres, I have like a few core theses that I am on a mission to try to prove, is that there's more to being pro-Palestine than simply being anti-Israel. Listen, the military occupation of the Palestinian territories, I'm against. The violent settler behavior and the settler and the killing of the Palestinian people's aspirations for statehood and the dehumanization of Palestinians. I'm against all of that. But I also have space within that, like, if anything, in order to bolster that opposition to the occupation, there has to be space for condemnation of terrorism, of jihadi ideology that Hamas has introduced to the Palestinian society, which is really an abomination to the society. It is not organic to the society. They've only laid roots over the last, you know, 35 or so years, but like only in the last 18 years have they really entrenched that in the Gaza Strip and made themselves the central component of the Palestinian national project, and in so doing destroyed it. I've been, and I want to be very careful about how I frame this because I talk to a lot of folks in the Palestinian diaspora, and there's the Palestinians from Palestine. There's the in the territories and in Palestine, and then there's like the Palestinian diaspora, and those are totally different audiences. Unfortunately, there's a combination of ignorance, guilt, uh, sadness for what's happening in Gaza, fear that their words are going to be twisted by that if they come out against Hamas. They're like, oh, people tell me regularly, well, I don't want to speak out against Hamas because the Zionists are going to come and take my words and use them against my people, just like they use your words, Ahmed, against our people. And I'm like, I can't control who uses my words. And you can't go through life being governed by how other people are going to respond to what you're saying. Like, there are truths that have to be said no matter what. I am very disappointed by the devolution of pro-Palestine activism, particularly within the diaspora community, who are well resourced, well educated, well connected, into sloganeering, into ideological talking points, into the opposite I identify as a radical pragmatist. It's like, let's go back as far away from the current situation as possible and use, working with our non-Palestinian allies and use academic mumbo jumbo and try to explain away why Gaza is now being destroyed because of Zionism in the 1800s and neocolonialism and this.
And we're all white and we're all from Poland. And
Exactly. So there's that component, but let me share some good news with you. The good news, which is also somewhat sad in the same breath, but it is part of what sustains me. The number of Arabs, Palestinians, Muslims who quietly and privately reach out to me and say, thank God you're saying what we know is true, but have a hard time saying so publicly. Thank goodness someone else is saying it. I'm sorry you have to be the one who says it and deal with all the consequences of saying it, but I'm with you. And there's spectrums of that. Some people are like all with me. Some people are like, listen, man, I'm not down with Israel. I can't stand Israel, blah blah. But like this Hamas garbage and these people that are like normalizing Hamas, this is evil. Hamas is like literally the most evil thing that could have ever happened to our people. So like there's tiers of it as well, is the good news. So that's now sometimes I'm like, okay, can you please grow a spine and like start saying things publicly? And they're like, well, my family's crazy. My girlfriend's family are crazy. My in-laws are crazy. They're pro Hamas. My mosque is intense. My community center is intense. I started speaking out against Hamas and then I couldn't get play dates for my little children. I started getting people, not coming to my shop or whatever. So the way that a lot of Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims have their lives layered and structured in the diaspora, it is very difficult to break away from the tribal tendencies. For me and several others, like I love my community. I love my people. I'm very proud of my heritage. Some people think that I'm a self-hating Arab. Like I'm completely like that couldn't be further from the truth. Like I'm immensely proud of my Palestinian Arab Muslim roots and heritage. But like I also don't really care if people like me or not. Like this is not a likability contest and like my life is structured in a way where I can deal with negative blowback. Most people are not. Finally, Vivian, I just want to say people in Gaza, like, are completely like the diaspora of the Palestinian people in Canada, in the US, in Europe. They are largely completely disconnected from the people in Gaza. The people in Gaza in Mac, and that's what really sustains me. That's why I'm continuing to keep that's why I get up every day. That's why I move forward every day, despite the depressing news, despite the horror, the loss of life, the threats of violence against my life, all the garbage associated with speaking out. People in Gaza are like, basically, they tell me, they're like, yes, a lot of us believe in that. I've been blessed to support a lot of these protesters who are anti-Hamas, provide them with financial support, provide them with messaging support and because they ask. And I've never fomented those things because I believe that it has to be those anti-Hamas sentiments have to be organic. We can't from the outside world impose upon them and tell them you go protest if they're and that's the wonderful news. Is like the people in Gaza in mass are rejecting Hamas. Not just this is super important, Vivian. Not just because of the consequences of October 7th. Because some in the pro-Israel community, they're like, well, they're opposing Hamas now only because they lost and the war is bad and they're turning against them, blah, blah, blah. No, 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 no. There's multiple threads to the opposition to Hamas. I would say one of the most, and yes, of course, part of that is the death and destruction that they brought. Like that goes without saying, but that's not what's really. There's an actual ideological realignment. That's why I launched the organization called Realign for Palestine in Washington. There's a realignment happening, and that's why I want to capitalize on that. Where armed resistance against Israel, I think, in my view, in Gaza, I'm talking specific to Gaza, forget the West Bank, that's a whole other monster, is truly being delegitimized, is truly being shown as a fraud, as a complete lie that Hamas has basically spread for generations now, a couple of generations, saying that, oh, armed resistance is going to give us, from the river to the sea, armed resistance is going to achieve conditions better than Oslo could offer us. So this is exposing the fraud of armed resistance and the uselessness of all these tunnels and all these guns that are now being used against Gazans. The behavior of Hamas and how it is embedding itself in hospitals and in medical facilities, in schools rather, and is acting ruthlessly and is stealing a lot of supplies and aid and is just acting like a ruthless terror thug operation. That is, I would say, the second most important reason for why people are rejecting Hamas, because they are seeing Hamas's behavior and they're realizing, wow, like not only do you not care about us, like you really genuinely want us killed, like you want us all. Sinwar himself said it, like we will all burn before surrendering. Hania said it. We need the blood of women and children as necessary sacrifices. So that's what's really exposing Hamas. Meanwhile, you have these imbeciles in the Western world still cheering on for Hamas. Why are students in Yale wearing Hamas headbands, for goodness sake? So I've started to wonder, like, is it even, is the diaspora even relevant? I mean, yes, they're relevant in so far as like they're some elements of the diaspora, not all, obviously, are very harmful to the Palestinian issue. But, and then the final thing that I'll say about the diaspora is that, and I want to be very charitable in how I say this, but like our community's in shambles. There's a reason why we don't have the Palestinian equivalent of APAC 77 years later, despite having all the resources. Like our community is disorganized. Like all we have in the United States is Students for Justice in Palestine, that's on college campuses, or CARE, which is basically a Muslim Brotherhood. If you look at the Jewish community, you have the J Street, you have Israel Policy Forum, you have the ADL, you have the AJC, you have APAC, you have the federations, you have the JCCs, you have the Zionist World Organization, the Jewish National Fund, this, da, 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 da. There's something for everybody. When you come along and try to create something for everybody on the Palestinian side, you're immediately attacked as a traitor, as a Zionist, as a collaborator. It's the Orientalists, neo-colonialists that are saying we're all the same.
Absolutely. And also for many of them to presume that the values that Palestinians or Arabs may hold are totally consistent and aligned with Western liberal democratic values. And they're not. And that's one that I got to hand it to President Trump. He just blew that out of the water on this visit, his recent visit to the Middle East, which I think sent seismic kind of shocks around the world. Just simple acknowledgement of, hey, I understand you have a very different culture and you have your way of doing things. And we have to find common ground, pragmatic ground, so that we can work and improve life and lives in both our countries. But let's leave Trump to the side for now. I just want to ask you a question to which I know the answer you've already partially indicated, but I think it's important for people to hear from you. You've lived in the States all of this time. You've maintained very close ties with your very large family that we're going to talk about in a moment, in the Gaza Strip. But you also speak out very freely, and you've become a super important voice. And I'm assuming that your family and perhaps friends have paid a price for that in the Gaza Strip for your forthrightness. Is that the case?
To a certain extent, yes. I mean, I'll be honest with you. So, Israeli airstrikes, three separate airstrikes, killed over 33 of my immediate and extended family members in 2023. And that was part of what put me on the map and that tragedy. And I have equally been an outspoken critic of Netanyahu, of the war strategy, of what I believe are horrendous atrocities that are entirely unnecessary. I don't, my forthrightness is not solely dedicated to Hamas, though I choose to focus on Hamas because I feel like that's the gap that a lot of people aren't addressing. It's a very like black and white. It's like pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. We know what the pro-Israel say. We know what the pro-Palestine community say, but there's like nothing in between this like no man's land, if you will, that can be pro-Palestine but anti-Hamas, against violent terrorism, and for Jewish and Israeli safety and security, but against the political decisions of the Israeli government and the dehumanization of the Palestinian people, to hold multiple truths. When the third airstrike took place, that was exceptionally deadly. That wiped out my mom's family, basically. She did tell me soon after that, like, whoever Israel didn't kill with the airstrikes, you're going to get killed with your writings and actions. And she was referring to me, precisely what you were saying about me speaking out against Hamas, me acknowledging that Hamas is a nefarious terrorist organization that has hijacked the Palestinian National Project. And that, at the time, and it still does, but at the time, weighed very heavily on me. Um, and is precisely why so many Palestinians from Gaza are unable to speak out because of the blowback on their families. And Hamas kills opposition members or opponents or those who speak out. Hamas kills protesters and throws them outside of their families' homes. Hamas is a despicable ISIS-like organization at this point. My brother is on the ground in Gaza right now. He runs a major medical NGO
In Gaza City?
in southern Gaza.
Is your mom still in
I got my mom is out, got her out. I got my brother's wife and 4 children out. I got some other family members out. I have had to contend with folks who have asked questions in Gaza about what I'm doing.
right?
And like, it's like the framing is, which is true, which is accurate. Is to just say, well, this guy is in the United States. He does his thing. He's just this wild dude. What do we have to do with him? He's a crazy guy. Just leave us alone. We're trying to survive. Yeah. So, but in all seriousness, I have decided, and that's a selfish decision because I decided it without input from family and friends in Gaza, that this is much bigger than myself or my family. This is about the very, like, the existential threat that the people of Gaza face due to Hamas's terrorism and evil horror. Um, and so I very much so believe that what I'm doing, even if it's, I mean, I get threats all the time. But even if it's dangerous business, even if it entails risks to my loved ones, it's very critical that this be said and done.
And I appreciate you for doing it. And I know not just your fellow Palestinians, but many people in the world look to you as a voice of reason and a beacon of morality and decency and reasonableness. So we need many more people like you to step up. So thank you for the work you do. And I asked that because I was certain that you do put some people possibly in difficult situations from time to time. And you refer to it as a selfish decision. And I can only say that as a mother of two young women, I understand your mother. Any mother would do that. Of course you would. But I also understand the way you frame the imperative. You just can't look away. And you talk about this really existential moment for the people of the Gaza Strip. And I think that we who really engage in this issue in the kind of obsessive way that you and I seem to do, um, it is an existential moment. And October 7th was, for all of us, I think, a horrifically existential trigger for so many things in the moment. But as we've seen it play out, I hate to use that phrase, I don't mean it cavalierly, but we've seen what time has brought and wrought on both the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and Israelis. Very different scenarios, but I believe that for both people, existential issues are paramount, and both sides are really struggling with how to address it. So this is where I decided to break and end the first part of this lengthy discussion. I shouldn't have to say this, but I know it's necessary to stress that I am not in any way suggesting an equivalency between what Hamas did on October 7th and has continued to do since that horrible day, and what Israel did and has done. None. We do, however, really have to work to move away from this default to black and white. 19 months on, things have become much more complex, not less so. Living in Israel and experiencing the day-to-day reality of this war is quite different from what listeners in Europe, North America, Australia, UK, and beyond might see, feel, and know. We are all in a really difficult and dark place, and we simply must find a way through. Retreating to silos and bulwarking will not, in my view, serve anyone well in the long run. And I do believe it is important to reiterate that more than 70% of Israelis think that the war must end now, even if it means withdrawing our forces from the Gaza Strip. We must bring home the hostages now. They will not live much longer in that hell. And only then can Israel begin to heal and really plan a way forward. Thanks for listening. Tomorrow, we bring you part 2 of this discussion, in which Ahmed and I discuss the present, why people in the Gaza Strip are not openly opposing Hamas, and also why some are beginning to do so. And of course, we discuss that horrible day that changed so many lives, October 7th. Thanks for being here. See you tomorrow. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager, who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here. We'll be back soon.